Definition arguments, establishing the terms. You're probably wondering how definitions can even be arguable. Don't we just look up the meanings of words in the dictionary? And while to some extent this is true, the reality is that dictionary definitions are limited. Words have power, some more than others. And while we can look up those words, what the dictionary tells us doesn't really reveal that power. What we choose to call things and how we choose to categorize things can be of great consequence for large groups of people. Therein lies the power of the definition argument. Some words themselves are loaded with controversy. Let's take a look at a few examples. Racism, sexism, genocide, privilege, ability, even the word normal. Depending on the context in which you're using these words and who your audience is, these words have somewhat different meanings. These are loaded words, powerful words. In fact, these words really are about power. Words that can be used to claim power or shift power are almost always rich terms for definition arguments. Definition arguments often involve a closely related method of development called classification. Classification involves sorting elements of one group into various categories. Here are a few examples. We often sort people into genders or races. Sometimes we sort courses into type. We call it a STEM course or a humanities course. We often sort health into physical, mental, and emotional. Definition arguments are often about how we classify something. What category does this thing belong to? And why does that classification matter? When creating a definition argument, just as we do with any argument, you must always consider your audience and purpose. Your goal is to create some kind of change in the audience, so there really is no point in arguing for a definition that your audience already accepts. The successful definition argument is about identifying the term and then conveying it in a way that helps move your audience from what they already understand to what you want them to understand. You're entering an argument of definition when you formulate a controversial definition. All of the examples on this slide and the next slide come from the link at the bottom of this slide that I found when I Googled definition arguments. In the 21st century, what it means to be a woman has taken on a new definition. No longer a simple issue of anatomy, we now know that women are not always born. Sometimes boys can grow up to become women too. You also enter an argument of definition when you challenge an existing definition. Defining woman based on genetics is limiting. Instead, gender should be determined by a person's mental rather than physical state. You also enter arguments of definition when you try to determine whether something fits into an existing definition. Although Gina Rosero was born a boy, she is a woman based on her current anatomy and involvement in feminine activities such as beauty pageants. And finally, definition arguments are entered whenever you seek to broaden an existing definition. Not all women are born with female genes. There are many ways to be a woman that transcend genetic boundaries. So we're going to look at an example student definition argument. Here is the thesis in that paper. Extensive cell phone use can be considered an addiction as it meets this definition. It causes negative health effects, decreases one's performance, and negatively impacts relationships. This argument first defines an addiction or some of the elements of an addiction, and then shows how extensive cell phone use can be classified as an addiction because it meets these parts of the definition. An argument like this becomes pretty straightforward to structure. The first body paragraph proves the first part of the thesis. Extensive cell phone use impairs health. The second body paragraph proves that extensive cell phone use decreases performance. In some specific areas, perhaps this is where the writer can break it down into academic performance, physical performance. We will need those categories. And finally, prove that extensive cell phone use negatively affects relationships. So once the definition is established, this argument then takes their term or their thing, which is cell phone use in this case, and provides evidence that shows how similar it is to addiction based on the definition of an addiction. And finally, please keep in mind, even if you're not making a definition argument, it is still likely that you will need to define important terms so that your audience can be on the same page as you are before you ask them to accept more challenging claims.